Hello and welcome to the parsha class this week, Parshat Behar 5784. I just learned recently that the parsha class is sponsored this week by Liz Thompson. Thank you very much. Should be a merit for her and for us to learn the great holy Torah of H-Shem. And we have a number of questions I sent out by email, and we're going to get right into it in just a moment. First, a quick summary of the parsha. It is a rather short parsha, usually read together with what's going to be next week's parsha this year, Behar Bechukotai, and the parsha is relatively well quoted, mostly because it contains the laws of the shemitta, the yovel. That's the so shemitta is the cycle every 7 years. The land is required to lay fallow, not to be worked, and every cycle of these 7 cycles is called a yovel. Every 49 years is a yovel, is a jubilee year when everything goes back to its original ancestral home and ownership relationship. So for that to happen, all the Jewish people need to live in the land, and at least we've lost at this point. We still keep Shemitah, but we've lost the tradition of when exactly the Yovel year is, and there are different opinions, of course, as is common, but we don't really have a really good idea of when the Yovel year is. All right. Without further ado, and it also deals with many of the laws of borrowing money, lending money, of ribbit, of the laws of interest, and whether they can be charged, and when and how much, and not cheating people, as we'll see in the text of the class as we get right into it. So without any further ado, let's see what the great commentaries of the past have to teach us about this week's parsha. We're going to look at the source sheet that I shared with you by email. If you have not received it, let me know. I can share it with you as well. It's also, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's in the comments. It's in the not comments. It's in the description, along with the questions that, God willing, we will address in today's class. All right, let's start with the first verse and the first question that we're going to deal with. Second verse in the parsha says, "Daber al bnei Yisrael." Moshe is told to speak to the Jewish people. Ve'amarta lehem, and say to them, Ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lachem, v'shavta haaretz Shabbat laHashem. So the verse tells us that the land is going to have a rest. It says the Jewish people are told, Moshe is told to tell the Jewish people that when kitavo el haaretz, when you go into the land, asher ani noten lachem, that I give you, v'shavta haaretz, then the land will rest, Shabbat laHashem, a Shabbat for Hashem. So what does that mean, a Shabbat for Hashem, that the land is going to rest it? It's one thing that the people are not going to work, so really the farmer is going to rest. What does it mean the land is going to rest? And what does it mean a Shabbat for Hashem? And what does it mean a Shabbat for Hashem at all? As opposed to, some other kind of Shabbat, not for Hashem? What does that even mean? Okay, so we're going to look at a Hasidic comment from Rav Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, the Kedushat Levi. So he says on Parshat Behar, he has only one short comment on the entire on the entire parsha, very unusual. But so he quotes this verse: "Shavta haaretz Shabbat laHashem, ki ita b'ktivi ha'arizal." He quotes the Arizal. There's a whole halachic discussion there. The Arizal is commenting on the Tur, which is a halachic source, that back in the day, a long, long time ago, before we even entered the land, It says v'ita b'tur ki b'shat shibud Mitzrayim haya Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom mevakesh sheparo shehiyah Yisrael nochim yom echad. Moshe was told to ask Paro for one day to rest. Right? Give them a weekend, right? Me'avoda, from their work. Ubachar at Yom HaShabbat, and that's why Shabbat was given. And that's what we say in the Shemona Esrei. We say in the Shemona Esrei of Shabbat, we say that Moshe Samach Moshe Matnat Chelko, that Moshe was happy with his lot, right? That he that he had the opportunity to introduce the whole concept of Shabbat to the Jewish people. When? Before the giving of the Torah, before even they entered the desert, even before the 10 plagues. This is something that Moshe did, according to this idea from the Torah. There's something that Moshe did much earlier when he asked Paro for this day off. Ki hu mekodem shetzivu Allah mechshavto mizeh yom menucha. He just asked for a day of rest, a weekend, like I said. V'zeh pirush v'ata tiber, and you say to them, why? Ki atam mekodem tzivita lenuach b'Shabbat. He's the one, since he introduced the whole concept of Shabbat to the Jewish people, so it should come from him that there's also a Shabbat for the land. That's what it means, that it's that they should observe a Shabbat in the land. That they have the Shabbat. It's something that Moshe introduced, more or less. But who really commanded them to keep Shabbat? It wasn't really Moshe. Moshe was just a servant of Hashem. He's just the mouthpiece. So really, that comes from Hashem also, and that's why v'zehu shavta ha'aret Shabbat laHashem. That's why it says the land shall rest a Shabbat for Hashem, specifically for Hashem. Ki derech ha'olam l'churosh sadeh shana echa l'niach bor shana bet. It's totally normal. It's a common occurrence, even in farms all across the world, for the land to lay fallow for a short time, whether it be a year, a few months, whatever it is. That's normal. That's actually good for the ground. It makes it more fertile. So you might think, this is the Torah having a nice idea, just like Moshe had a nice idea for a rest. So the Jewish people had Shabbat. It's not just the weekend. Moshe's Shabbat is just a weekend. The command that Shabbat is Hashem's makes it so that Shabbat is supposed to be a holy experience. Same thing goes with the shemitta, with the sabbatical year every 7 years that the parsha is talking about. That too is la Hashem. It's for Hashem. It's not just to let the land rest, to have more fertile fields or something like that. It's a miracle. It has a holy purpose. And that's the lesson here. That's why it says Shabbat LaHashem, because you might think, we're letting the land rest just like we need to rest. The land needs to rest. Land all over the world needs to rest. No. That's not why the land rests every 7 years in Israel. It's not because it needs the rest. It's because we're making a holy statement. We're basically telling Hashem that the land is not ours. It's his, as it says later on in the parsha. But before we get to that, let's skip a few lines to chapter 25, verse 14. Verse 25, verse 14. So remember, the Torah has a lot of lessons. It has lessons in ethics, in psychology, in self-improvement, in business, and everything. There's just the Torah is chock full of ideas. Hashem really wants us to learn it so that we'll know better how to live our lives. One great example is this verse in this parsha that is the source for a halacha, for Jewish law. So without going into the entire history of Jewish law, we know that Moshe Kibel Torah Messina, as it says in the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, Moshe acquired the Torah, the oral Torah, at Sinai, and then he taught it to the Jewish people, taught it to Yeshua, to the Cain and the Nadim, etc. So before we get to all that, the it's sort of an important part of Jewish history is that oral Torah was eventually written down. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the Yehuda the prince, around the year, let's say 200, just to keep it simple, which is about, say, 1,800 years ago or so. So he wrote down the Mishnah as we have it today. And that Mishnah is basically the oral law. Now, he wrote it in a way that was somewhat accessible, but not completely accessible, that you would need, he basically would require you to have some sort of oral law knowledge in order to understand the Mishnah. It's kind of like the Torah in a sense, the written Torah, because the written Torah also doesn't completely always make sense without some commentary, without some oral law, without somebody explaining what the things mean, even if you understand the words, which is already a miracle. To then come from that and to understand a story or to get a lesson out of it, that's already deeper, and that requires some commentary. So that commentary in the Mishnah was written about 300 years later, and it's called the Talmud or the Gemara. So let's follow along a little bit in this Gemara that is going to use this verse. So let's read the verse first, as is our method here. Chapter 25, verse 14. V'hi timkuru mimikola mitecha okona miyad mitecha al tono ish et achiv. So there's basic economics going on. You're going to sell stuff. You're going to need stuff, right? Economics is based on the concept of need. People need, right? They're not either satisfied or they don't have everything that they require for life. And so they trade or they buy. So when they do, excuse me a moment. Sorry. So when they do, the Mishnah says, "Echad halokech ve'echad hamocher yesh lahem ona'ah." There's this concept of ona'ah, this concept of being able to renege on a deal if you feel the deal is unfair. That's called ona'ah. So says the Mishnah that whether you're the buyer or the seller, you can back out of a deal, renege, whatever you want to call it, back out of a deal if you think there's something unfair going on, overpricing or bad quality or undercutting or whatever you think the case may be. You're able to back out of a deal whether you are, again, the seller or the buyer. And says, H-Shem shona lehedyot kach ona letagar. So it says it's just like there's ona, there's this concept of backing out of a deal, whether you're a buyer or a seller, just like it's true for somebody who's, not usually buying and selling stuff. In other words, we've got somebody who's not a professional, doesn't own a store, he's just maybe has some extra, I don't know, old clothes, so you have a garage sale or something. So that's called a hedyot in Hebrew or Aramaic, or actually probably Greek, but whatever. Not going to get into that now. Either way, so whether it's a tagar or whether it's a or whether it's a hedyot, either way, whatever your professional seller, buyer, doesn't matter. You can back out of a deal if you think it's not fair, right? Rabbi Yehuda Omer ain't onar l'tagar, but no, Rabbi Yehuda says no. If you're a seller and you're an expert and you're professional, you know what you're getting yourself into. You can't back out, etc. So just to so that's the basically the Mishnah, and then the Mishnah asks the question. The Gemara asks the question: Mahani mili. Menahani mili. How do you know this? That's Aramaic for how do you know that? How do you know? Where do you get this from? That there's this concept of you can't cheat the buyer or the seller. So this uses literally our verse. The Tanu Rabbanan says in our parsha, in our pasuk, in this parsha, "V'chi timkuru mimkar lamitecha." When you sell to the nation, al tonu, you can't cheat him, you can't lie. Just like we translated it. Just from that, it seems like you can't cheat the buyer. How do you know you can't cheat the seller? How do you know you can't cheat the seller? How do you know you can't? You see somebody you're at a garage sale and somebody's selling an expensive, I don't know, somebody's selling the Mona Lisa, right? You can't just buy that for $5. You might have to inform them that what they have is worth more. And if they don't care, then they don't care, and then you can buy it. But there might be ethical issues with buying something really cheap when it should be worth more. Anyway, how do you know that? Tamalomar o kone al tono. Even if you are buying kone, even if you're acquiring al tono, you can't cheat. Not the buyer, not the seller. Neither one of them are allowed to cheat the other, and they have the ability and the right to back out of the deal, whether they're the buyer or the seller, and that's a very important thing. We have it's incredible. We have ethical considerations in all kinds of areas of Jewish law. Let me just give you a quick example of something that I don't know how relevant it is. Not all of us own property to buy and sell, but there's a halakha question asked recently of, I believe it's was it Rav Sternbach, Rav Zilberstein. So he was asked the question. He's the brother-in-law of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. So he was asked the question, why is it that I take that back. Let's ask another question. Sorry. Better question. You've got somebody who's selling a house, right? So if you buy the house, you're about to buy the house, and it's in escrow, etc., and you find out that there's something wrong with the house, you're allowed to back out of it, right? And based on that, there's also halacha that if you're asking somebody if they're selling their house and the answer is no, they have to tell you no, and if the answer is yes, they have to tell you yes. Now, you might ask yourself, how is it cheating somebody if you're saying you're not selling the house and then you change your mind and you are? So that's not a cheat. If they're saying they're not selling the house but they really are, they might be trying to jack up the price or something. So but if they're not selling the house and they say that they are, I'm saying the case all wrong. I'm sorry. Give me a sec. I'm on the spot here. I know this is being recorded. All right. All right. So, let's see. What was the case? The case was somebody was looking for a house, and he asked somebody if he's selling the house. If the answer is yes, it has to be yes. If the answer is no, it has to be no. Now, ordinarily, you would think, logically speaking, we understand why. If the answer is yes, and you say it is not. No, the answer. Sorry. Now I remember. You have to stick with whatever you said. So if your answer was yes, and you're selling the house, you can't back out of it. And once they're already, in escrow, and say, I'm not interested anymore. All right, it's too late at that point. Similarly, if the answer was no, I'm not selling the house, you can't back out and then change your mind and say, yes, I am selling the house. Now, the question is, why not? Who's losing out? Who are you cheating by changing your answer in that case? And the answer says the Ben Ish Chai. We're going to have the Ben Ish Chai later on. So the Ben Ish Chai, in his commentary on the Talmud, so he says Ben Yehoyada. So he writes, you know who you're cheating? You're cheating your neighbors, because your neighbors might want to sell their house too. And when you put your house on the market, when they've already assumed based on your answers that you're not selling your house, and they've already set a price to the house, and now you're going to enter the market, you're going to affect everybody else's price. And that's going to affect everybody. And what's brilliant about this halacha, now that you're not, on that note, is that we're not only expected to consider and care about the buyer and the seller, we're supposed to care about the whole neighborhood. We're supposed to think about, well, how is this going to affect my neighbor? How is this going to affect, three houses down the street, three houses down the block? It can affect everybody, and that's why we're so careful about how honest we are in business. Very important. This whole parsha deals with honesty in business in different contexts. Let's share this next idea from the Dubno Maggid. So Dubno Maggid was a famous rabbi from about 250 years ago, lived in the town of Dubno. Maggid means he's a storyteller, or that's basically how it's translated. And what he did was he was basically a traveling speaker, more or less. Right? He would go from congregation to congregation, give speeches. He spent a lot of time in Vilna, and he learned a little bit from the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon learned from him. There's different versions of the story. Either way, so the story goes that so he usually gave what are called mashalim. A mashal is allegory. Yeah, it's an allegory, a metaphor for a story that tells some sort of message in the story, and he used those to explain the different verses in the Torah. So chapter 25, verse 23 says, "Va'aretz lo timacher limtzitut ki li haaretz." This is a very famous verse. It's used very often in the discussion of Zionism versus anti-Zionism. We're not going to get into that big discussion right now. That's a whole can of worms, if you will. But either way, so he says, you cannot, we spoke about this already, that there's this concept of the Jubilee year. So even if you sell your landed property, the property that's been in your family forever, since the time Yeshua came into the land, so that landed property goes back to you after 49 years, even if you sold it. That means, by the way, that when you sold it, it was a temporary sale, otherwise known as a rental, right? And the amount of time the amount of money you're charging for it has to factor in the amount of time that person's going to live on that land, right? If they're only going to live there, it's the 48th year, the 49-year cycle, right? And somebody buys the house, they're not going to buy the house for the full price. They're going to buy the house for a year's worth of living, because he's only going to be there, he or she or they're only going to be there for that amount of time, until the 49th year. Okay, so that's what it says about ours. Lo timachera mitut. You cannot sell the land forever. Ki li ha'aretz. The land is mine, says Hashem. It's not yours. I don't care whose flag you're flying. It's my land. Ki gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. You are gerim, which can be translated as converts. It's usually translated as strangers or people who aren't settled somewhere. V'toshavim, that means the opposite, people who have settled, otherwise known as citizens. So aliens and citizens is one way to translate it. How do they translate it here? Strangers resident, whatever that means. Atem imadi, you are with me, gerim and toshavim. You are with me as these strangers and as these citizens. So the question is that the Dubno Maggid wants to know, which is it? Are we strangers? Are we citizens? When have you ever heard of such a thing being put together? Like alien citizens. That would change the entire dynamic of the debate going on in America now about the border crisis or whatever. So which is it? So he says he's gonna explain this like this. He says, we can explain it like this. How can you compare these two words Gam echad, like together. Our question. Alien citizen. Ki im heima gerim, if you are alien, ena toshavim, then you're not citizens. Im toshavim heima, and if you are citizens, enam gerim, you're not alien. You're part of the land. Okay, yesh lahavin gam Amar Avram Avinu. He quotes he quotes Avram Avinu, who in Bereshit said, "Ger v'toshav anochi machem." He says to the people that when he's buying the burial place for Sarah Imenu, for his wife. So he says to the people there that he is a stranger and alien among them. So, and what do our rabbis say? Im tirtzu hareini ger, im lav mari ke beta. So you can treat me either way, is what he says. Shkach amar li hakadosh baruch hu. That's what Hashem said. Hashem is going to give me the land, says Abraham. And either way, whether you want to treat me as a citizen or as not a citizen, either way, this is going to be my land, and I'm willing to bring myself down to the level of I'll live among you in the land that I'm going to get eventually. But for now, it'll be as it is. So then he explains. Let's just skip to the Nimshal. So he tells the story. We're not going to get into the story right now. We're kind of running low on time, but not too low. Don't worry, we're not ending the class quite yet. But we've got some other goodies to share with you today. Gam ki hakadosh baruch hu lehelit et haaretz la'Avram. Sorry. Here we go. So what we can explain is like this: Ki adam ki ger haaretz nachriya. A person is like we live in this land, but we don't at the same time. We're both settled and we're not. Ke'orech nata lalun. It says in Tehillim, ger anochi ba'aretz. I am a stranger on this land. David HaMelech, the king, said, I'm a stranger on this land. Zehu haaretz lo timacher litzmitut. We can't settle the land forever. V'shalomar gam shehich nasti etchem letocha. There's no such thing as us being out of the land forever, right? Because we belong there. Aval lo tashmitu kol askinam be'olam hazeh v'kviyut. So, but you have to remember the same thing is true about this land, about this world. We're only in this world temporarily. We are both settlers and we're unsettled. Kolomar bein shninu echad ger ve'echad toshav kasher anachnu nidfas bechinat gerim be'arz tihya malachto arai. As long as we realize that this land is not permanent, and this world that we live in is not a permanent world, we have a soul that's permanent. It's going to go to the world to come, which is permanent. And meanwhile, we decay here for 120 years, trying to do the best we can with mitzvot and Torah, etc. That's so we can live with Hashem only if we realize that we are gerim. In other words, we need to settle our possessions. We need to buy our homes. We need to own real estate in the world to come, because that's the permanent place. All we do here is temporary to just prepare for that. This changing room, this green room, as they say in the arts, right? We're just preparing. We're in the foyer, getting ready to enter the banquet hall. The banquet hall is over there. That's where all of our reward is waiting for us. But we have to realize that. When we realize that, that's when we become permanent residents, citizens of the world to come. By being, in other words, again, we are both. We are gerim here, and by being gerim here, we're toshavim there. By being aliens, legal or otherwise, in this world, we become citizens of the world to come. That's the Dubno Magid. And again, He's again learning lessons from the parsha. We've had lessons in business already. We've had lessons in holiness and how to make things holy, and now we have a lesson in how to appreciate this world, what to think of it, so that we keep things in perspective. This world might sometimes throw you a curveball. It might be a very difficult world to live in, but just realize that whatever life we have here is temporary and is only going to lead us to better things in the world to come. All right, let's as promised, let's get to that Ben Ish Chai. I was looking forward to this. I actually was planning on teaching this, I think, last year. You can see the parsha video in last year's parsha, and it just ran out of time, and so we moved it to this year. So chapter 25, still in chapter 25, almost all, by the way, I forgot to mention, almost all of this parsha is chapter 25 of Vayikra. Only the last two verses, verse 1 and 2 of chapter 26, are in this parsha as well. Otherwise, every single verse is in chapter 25. It's just an interesting factoid. You can use it at parties or whatever. All right, chapter 25, verse 35, towards the end. Ki yamuch achicha umata yado imach. When you're, we'll get to the context of this verse in our next lesson. I mean, in today's lesson, but in the next, in the last piece that we're going to learn today, I think. So again, when your brother, achicha, when your brother, your family, when they get poor and they suffer, you should redeem them. You should support them, right? And let them be like these resident aliens. You should let them live by your side, imach, with you. So the question is, why does it say imach, with you? Because really, this verse would have made as much sense without the word with you. Again, just let's look at Safaria's English translation real quick. If your kin being in straits comes under your authority and are held by you as though resident aliens, let them live. Let them live. Help them. Keep them alive. Why imach, by your side? What is that supposed to add to this whole story? So the Ben Ish Chai gives two answers. One we're going to skip for today. The Ben Ish Chai gives a mashal, an allegory. The Dubno Maggid was not the only one who gave mashalim. Baruch Hashem. All right, so it says, Melech Echad, Tzchar Chacham Gadol, a great wise king, hired a great wise man to teach his son. Yikshir et beno, and he wanted his son to get ready to be the next king. He needed to prep the young prince. Wanted to give this wise man, this advisor, was supposed to give lessons to this prince about how to live his best life and how to be a proper king. So he taught him, and the son learned a lot of lessons, and everything was going well. My goodness. Okay, all right. Whew. Just got a bunch of pop-ups on my screen. I hope you guys didn't see that. All right. Either way, again, so he taught him how to be a king. He taught him all the rules. Maybe like Machiavelli, maybe like the Barbanel. I don't know which advisor he was like, but he taught the young prince all kinds of lessons. Just a moment. And then a strange thing happened. Right before he gives the son back to the king, the advisor says, this wise man says, "One moment, please. I would like to speak to your son in private in this room." Takes him into the room and starts, for no reason, seemingly out of the blue, starts beating him. This wise man, this rabbi, this Talmid Chacham, right? This wise man is beating up the prince. King gets upset, and king says, "What are you doing? I didn't hire you for this. You deserve to be killed for something like this. Why would you want to hurt my son?" And the wise man said, if I don't hurt your son, he'll never know what it feels like to hurt someone else. To gain empathy into somebody else's situation, we need to suffer a little bit sometimes. There's a story told. I think it was. I think they tell the story in the name of. I think it might be the Panovich of Rav, maybe the Altar of Kelm. I don't remember now. He was collecting for his yeshiva, and it was the dead of winter. He came, knocked on a door, and the rich man opened the door. Says, "Oh, Rosh Yeshiva, so nice to see you. Come into the house. It's nice and warm in here." Says, "No, come outside." Says, "No, it's cold out there. Come outside. It's freezing. I'm not dressed for that. Come outside," says the Rosh Yeshiva. Over they go back and forth for a little while. Eventually, the rich man goes and stands outside for a little bit. Says, "It's freezing out here." He says, "You're right. Let's go back inside now." So that was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Says the rich man. What was the point of that? Says the Rosh Yeshiva says to him, "I'm collecting money for the yeshiva. Part of what we collect money for is to keep the yeshiva warm. We buy logs, we put it in the fire. And if you think for a moment that yeshiva boys don't get cold and that they don't need the warmth also, and if you don't know what the warmth feels like in comparison to the cold, then maybe you're not going to give as much money as you should." We need to realize what other people are going through and empathize with them and care about them. And especially a king's son who's going to be a king someday might decide willy-nilly to, say off with his head for no reason. So that's especially the person who needs to know, no, you can't do that. We need to think about what our actions are and what consequences they have. And that's why it says, so he explains, says the Ben Ish Chai, that's why it says imach, because that person that you're keeping alive, they have to live with you. You need to see their situation. You're saving their lives. You're bringing them out of poverty, right? You're setting them back up on their feet so they can be successful, useful members of society, whatever you want to call it. And for that to happen, you need to see what they're going through. You need to feel their pain with them. Not like just a former president would say, "I'll feel your pain." But like really, you should feel their pain. You should really understand that what they're going through is indeed a pain that you don't want anybody to go through. And that's what's going to help you be. That's what it says, imach, with you. That's what strengthens your resolve to really give charity in the proper way. That's I think a beautiful lesson from the Ben Ish Chai. All right, a couple more lessons today. One is, as I said before, I want to give you the whole context of how it is that you're supposed to save your brother, your kin. Again, we said the verse, we're going to repeat the verse here. This is chapter 25, again, obviously, verses 35 through 37. Your brother becomes poor and suffers. You're going to raise him up. Make him strong. You're going to make him into a resident alien among you. Great. Now, how is that going to happen? We get these two verses. Do not charge him interest. And you should fear H-Shem. And your brother shall live with you. So again, here's where the context is for how you're going to save him. You're going to save him by lending him money, and if you do, you can't charge him interest, right? Et kaspecha lo titen lo, kineshu tarbit lo titen achlecha. So you cannot lend him any kind of interest. You can't charge him interest, and you can't make him give you food on interest. Now, happens to be I have a little experience in this, happens to be that when you have interest and you owe people money, you owe people money basically forever. There's a cycle of interest. Unless you have some sort of miraculous way of getting out of it, you're usually going to be paying whatever money you owe towards the interest and not towards the principal, and you'll pretty much be stuck in the cycle that most, I think, a lot of Americans, at least I haven't done a full study, but if I understand correctly, a lot of Americans are living beyond their means and basically in debt to their credit card, to their mortgage, to their car. Yeah, so it's a normal American activity. It's almost a pastime now. However, in Judaism, we don't believe in charging interest to our brethren, certainly not to other Jewish people. And it's interesting to know, we've had in previous years, we've had other commentators, the Ramban had a famous explanation of why that is. But there's another beautiful answer that comes from the Kli Yakar from about 300-400 years ago in Prague. The Kli Yakar wrote, do you know why you can't charge interest? Think about it for a second logically. There's nothing really wrong with charging interest logically, because all you're doing is you're benefiting from a business deal. If I sell you a car, I'm not going to sell you a car for less than what I paid for it. I'm going to increase the price a little bit. There's a certain amount, 6%, whatever it is, 1/6, whatever it is. You can there's a halachas about these things, so you can increase the price and benefit. That's normal. That's business. Otherwise, you're it's just a free trade society. But there's something wrong with interest. Interest is not allowed, even though it's basically a rental of some money. Why should you lose out? Why should you not gain by lending somebody? You rented them a house, you rented them a car. You can charge money for that, no problem. I mean, there's amounts, but there's some amount you can charge. Why can't you charge interest? You know what the Kli Yakar says? Because the whole point of even being allowed to do business, of even being allowed to do business, right? Hashem has to permit it. We're allowed to do business only because we have to rely at least somewhat on Hashem for our parnasa. What do I mean? You go into business, there's risk. There's risk involved. And you have to pray that your end ends up positive, right? You end up in the black and not in the red. You have to pray. You have to believe that Hashem is going to help you. But the thing about ribbit, the thing about interest, says the Kli Yakar, in this whole midat habitachon, kenoda medavar meluyim ribit merubam mektani imana avera aviri leiv rechokim mitzedaka mitzad ki ein betuach b'Hashem. What happens when you lend people money on interest is you're gonna make money. You can't lose. You gave them $5. Eventually, if you're going to charge them interest, eventually you'll make more. You're not going to get $5 back. It's guaranteed money. And when you have guaranteed money, when money is for sure going to come in, then you don't need Hashem anymore. Or at least you think so. What do I need Hashem for? I don't have to pray to him. I know I'm going to get money. And that's the thing, that lack in emunah, that lack in faith, that's the thing that causes us to not be allowed to charge interest. Because immediately you lose that connection with Hashem. And this ties everything in together so beautifully. We've been talking about ethics, and we've been talking about holiness, and we've been talking about caring and having sensitivity and empathy for your fellow man. And all of that's tied in together, because all of that together allows us to have a relationship with Hashem. One last point for today's class. We're going to look at those two last verses I told you about that come from chapter 26, verse 1 and 2. seemingly out of the blue, since we're on the topic of seemingly out of the blue halachot, the verse tells us, "Lo tasu lachem elilim efeso matzeva lo tekimu lachem be'even maskit lo titnu ma'artzachem ishtachavot alecha ki ani Hashem Elokeichem." Don't make idols. Don't make carved images. All of the halachot of avodah zara basically here. Don't make any kind of what's it called, iconography, or any kind of other thing that's any image you're going to worship. I'm not talking about like a Barbie doll or a stuffed animal. We're talking about something that's made for purposes of worship. Don't make anything like that, because I am Hashem your God. And then the last verse, Et Shebtotai Tishmeru, guard my Sabbaths, and keep my holy places holy. Why? Ani Hashem, I am God. Says Rashi, right? Medieval commentary from about 900 years ago. So why are we bringing up this whole concept of idol worship all of a sudden? Why is this out of the blue topic here at all? Remember, you have to keep in mind what we had just talked about. I forgot to mention what chapter 25 ends with is this concept of, if the person becomes so poor and all the support systems all fail, he might have to sell himself as a slave to the Gentiles around him. What's going to happen amongst the Gentiles around him? Keneged zem kar lagoy, you're going to be surrounded by this non-Jew. Shelo yomar hoyel Rabbi Magela arayot. My master does these things. Afani kimot, I'm going to be like him too. My master, by the way, my successful master, right? He's rich enough to have bought me, right, as a slave, because all of my efforts have failed. Right? All of my praying and all of my Jewish community all fell through the cracks, and here I am now a slave to a non-Jew. He was able to afford me. He must be doing something right. It might be that little gotchka he's got on his necklace that he's praying to. Maybe that's it. You might start thinking that way. Says Rashi, that's what the pasuk is telling you here. The verse is telling you here. No, don't do that. Don't go after these kinds of things. That's not the method. But let's look at something that Rav Moshe Feinstein wants to say from that. So Darash Moshe, the writings of Rav Moshe Feinstein, passed away in 1986, within my lifetime. Baruch Hashem. He says, it's a tamua, it's a wonder. My tama nashnit kan ashara zu the etchaptotai tishmor. Why here, out of the blue, are we starting to talk about keeping the Sabbath? So now, v'im perish Rashi. So now, based on what we just said from Rashi, what did Rashi say again? Just a quick summary. Rashi just said the whole reason we're talking about not worshiping idols is because the non-Jew who you're surrounded by might be worshiping idols. So you too need to remember that, he's your owner, now he's your boss. But just because he's worshiping idols, that's not the reason for his success, and you can't do that either. So now, based on that, you need to know something about Shabbat. Hello, hiskir isur arayot, right? Imkein lama hiskir Shabbat. So why is Shabbat mentioned here? V'gam lama hiskir mikadshe tiro. And why does it have to tell us about being respecting the holy places, the Beit Hamikdash, etc.? Nira shehu inyan acher. Maybe it's a different matter altogether. Yalmed mirabu v'nachri, from your master, the non-Jew, la'avod et Hashem yitbarach kederech shehem ovdim et yiratam. It could be, you might learn from their methods of worship how you should worship your God. Let's say you're not doing avodah zarah. You're not going to worship you're not going to make icons. You're not going to make statues. You're not going to make whatever it is that they worshipped. That's not, but you're going to learn their method. You're going to say, oh, that's so holy. That's so amazing how they meditate. Oh, the way they bend over and put their legs through their ears and over their necks. I want to do that too. Yeah, that's very holy how they did that. Or they're so moral and they give so much charity and they light candles and they walk into their temples. Maybe we should do that too. You might learn their methods. You might not know the reasons for why they do what they do, but you might say, whatever it is, it's that's how you do it. So even that is a problem. It's okay for us to see, I think is the book My Jesus Year, which is written by a religious Jew who got permission from his rabbi to see how Christianity is a growing religion. So maybe something they're doing is would be a worthwhile task for the Jewish community to somehow copy. Maybe something maybe more popular Jewish music would be better if it was more like Christian rock or something. I don't know. Just throwing that out there. Uh, uh, but to learn from how they worship is a completely different story. How they run their organizations, a lot of lessons. You can learn that from anybody. Wisdom is in every nation, and you can and should learn that. But to copy their method of worship, that's a whole different story. Says Rav Moshe, especially when it comes to the temple and Shabbat, because you can make, if you really wanted to, you can make any day holy. You can make any place holy. I think there's a story that's told. Trying to remember how the story goes. 1 second. The story goes that um, some guys in the yeshiva asked asked the rabbi, what if I what would happen if I kept Shabbat on Wednesday? So the rabbi said, why don't you try it? So one Wednesday night, he made kiddush. He did the whole long davening and whatever else. He sang the songs, etc. After his new Shabbat, Wednesday night, he was going to make Havdalah, and he told his Rebbe, so I feel very holy. I feel very amazing. He says, yes, that's very nice that you feel that way. But what you just did is not Judaism. It's your own ism. You created this new religion. You can make anything holy. You can make any day Shabbat. But Shabbat for Hashem is Hashem's Shabbat. Right? He says when it is. And when you do it, when he says to do it, and you do it how he says to do it, then you're making that holy. Then you're keeping its holiness. Same thing here. We've got a Beit HaMikdash. A Beit HaMikdash, even the Beit HaMikdash can be unholy, can be sullied like it was in the time of the Greeks, right? That's the Hashmonaim, the Maccabees were fighting against. So that's one thing. But beyond that, there's this whole idea that without a source in the Torah. Here, let's look what he says. Let's look what he says. Aval Beit Hamikdash below Torah, a Torah, a Beit Hamikdash, the temple without a Torah, or Beit Knesset below Torah, or a shul without Torah. I had a suggestion just this week that maybe I should have fewer Torah classes and focus my energies on other things. Believe it or not, it's unbelievable that it happened in this week's parsha. Below Torah, ain't klum mamish. They're nothing. A shul without Torah, a Beit Hamikdash without Torah is just an empty building. V'hakara mimena zev amrun. That's what it's. That's he quotes Hosea. It says v'yiven hechalot. He says that it says that the Jewish people, Israel, forgot their maker and built temples. Building temples without Hashem is just a nothing exercise, an exercise in futility, right? And our many sins, Rabim nichshalim. Now many of us fail. V'notlim be'ein yafa al binyanim yoter me'al etzem halimud. We think that these big buildings are more important than the Torah that's supposed to support these things. Who limud shelamdu mehagoyim, and that which we learn from this is basically something we learn from the Gentile nations around us. Big fancy church, Gothic monasteries, right? Really impressive stuff, right? But they're empty. We don't need empty. We don't want to learn that. The same thing with Shabbat. We can't just have an empty weekend. That's what we started with here today, right? We can't just have Shabbat be a weekend, a day off, a day to relax or something like that. Shabbat is a holy day because we're given certain opportunities on Shabbat to make it special. The foods we eat, the relationships we make, the songs we sing, the Torah we learn. That's what makes a Shabbat. Anything else would be empty and indeed an exercise in futility. So that's why this beautiful lesson that we learned from this week's parsha, and it's been it's like the bookends of this week's parsha are this idea of keeping things holy, by caring about people, by being ethical, by being honest, and by really being concerned about making this world a temporary place and our focus in life, the world to come. We should all have a bracha that we should be successful in our endeavors in trying to grow and do the best we can in order to really encapsulate these ideas and to live our best lives in this world and in the world to come. I want to thank Liz for sponsoring, and wish you well, and and I hope the merit of Torah stands for all of us in these times. We should only see continued miracles in our lives. Thank you.